Hello everybody, this is Niclas Huschenbeth and welcome to a new opening tutorial, and in this one we're going to talk about the Caro-Kann. So what is the Caro-Kann? The Caro-Kann comes about after it moves 1 e4 and now black goes c7 to c6, and already here we talk of the Caro-Kann. What's the idea of the move c6? Black wants to go d5 next move and be able to take back with the pawn. If black was to play d5 immediately, white could take, and black would need to take with the queen, which he doesn't want to do because then the queen can be attacked with tempo, and it's another opening. It's a whole different set of positions. But this is the point why black goes c6 first to prepare taking back with the pawn. And related to that same idea is the French, which we have already seen. Also the idea to take back with the pawn on d5 just in case that white takes. So c6, now already here white can go in different directions, and the clear main move is to play d4, and we've learned this already in this series. We want to occupy the center. This is one of the main goals in the opening. We want to occupy the center, develop our minor pieces and get our king to safety, castle with our king short or long. So d4 is the main move. I want to point out another variation though, which is the two knights variation, where, as the name says, white first brings out his knights. Knight to f3, knight to c3, and he stays flexible with the pawn on d2 for now. And here black has three main choices. He can take on e4, which leads to similar positions. You can also see in the main line, so I'll talk about this later on. Black can go bishop to g4 when white goes h3. And black can go back here, but usually he takes, and we have positions like that where black has given up his bishop early on, but he has a very stable pawn chain in the center, and he can develop his bishop to b4 or to e7, and he has a lot of different plans here, sometimes even castling queenside. And lastly, there's the move knight to f6, which leads to quite untypical positions in the Caro-Kann. White goes e5 here in most cases. Now there's knight to e4, and there's some concrete lines here. White can go d4, he can go d3, but the main move is knight e2. Now black goes queen to b6, threatening checkmate on f2, and white goes d4. And then you go from there and continues, and quite unusual positions for the Caro-Kann, at least to my mind. So let us come back to the main move, which is after e4, c6. Like I said, occupy the center, d4. That's usually what you want to do. Now black goes d5, and here it really splits in three big main lines, which is the advanced variation, e5, the so-called exchange variation, taking on d5, and either playing the knight to d2 or to c3 to protect the pawn on e4, because this is what white needs to do in this position. The pawn on e4 is attacked by the pawn on d5, so white needs to react. There's also the move f3, which is known as the fantasy variation, but nowadays it's out of fashion and not considered to be that great for white. So let us begin with the exchange variation. White takes from d5, and here once again white has to make a choice. He can go for the so-called Panov Attack by immediately playing the move to c4 and then playing knight c3, knight f3, and what we'll see often here is that we get some kind of let me just make some moves. This is not the mainline theory, but what I want to show is that we'll get something like this, where white has the isolated pawn on d4 isolated, because there are no pawns on the c file or on the e file which can protect the pawn, and this makes it a target for the black pieces. On the other hand, white has a little bit better piece coordination, he has a little bit more space, so those two things balance each other out. Now let's come back and talk about the alternative white has in this position, that is not to play with c4, but to play it quietly, to play bishop to d3, knight c6 and c3, and then develop his pieces from there. Why bishop d3? To stop this bishop from developing. Now you can see the bishop cannot come out of the pawn chain right now because both these squares f5 and g4 are covered by the white pieces. And this is the very famous Karlsbad structure where white has 4 pawns here on the queen side, whereas black only has 3, and that means that black typically will try to attack this pawn chain by playing the so-called minority attack, bringing this pawn forward. Whereas white usually, if we just make some moves here, and this is not, once again, not the mainline theory, but just what I want to show you, whereas white will do something like the following: bring the knight to e5, maybe even here, and then try to get an attack going against the black king in many positions. Try to get his knight over, maybe play f4 even, get as many pieces close to the black king as possible, just to give you an idea of what these positions are about. So let us come back now to this position. So that was the exchange variation taken on d5. Now let's take a look at the advanced variation, which is very popular nowadays because it promises quite a complex game. Now black has 2 main choices. He can either bring out the bishop. This is, by the way, the advantage of the Caro-Kann over the French, that of course without a pawn on e6, black can still develop his light squared bishop and bring the bishop out of the pawn chain, in front of the pawn chain. So it's not locked in as it is usually in the French. So this is the main move, bishop f5. The other move is to play c5, which is kind of a French advanced variation, but you have lost the tempo because you played c6, c5. Still a viable option here for black. And white has different ways to play, but typically there's something like this: d takes c5, now black can go e6 or knight c6, knight f3, bishop g4, and there are often situations where black will not win the pawn back immediately, but it will take some time, but eventually you get something like, let's just again make some moves here, you will get something along these lines of the structure. Okay? Now let us come back to this position and see the move bishop f5, and here white has a huge array of options available. He can go h4, he can go g4, both the idea to immediately harass this bishop on f5. Those are very concrete moves. They're the moves to play knight d2 and bring the knight to b3. What's the point behind this? Well, the main way for black to attack the pawns is to go c5, so this is kind of a prophylactic measure against that. There's also the move knight c3 to take the e4 square away, and then later on maybe play with g4. So many moves. The main line though is to just play natural, develop your pieces, knight f3, e6, bishop e2, and here black pretty much has a choice, either going for c5 immediately or first playing some other moves and developing his pieces. And really depends, because if black doesn't go c5, then the position remains closed for a long time and white has more space, but it's still very tricky, and having more space doesn't automatically promise you an advantage. So it's a very, very complex position for both sides because so many pieces remain on the board. And if c5 is played, then once again we have this kind of structure: bishop e3 takes d4, knight takes d4, knight e7, where black has taken on d4, white has the pawn on e5, and of course black can benefit from the half-open c-file maybe later on, whereas white has more space, and what you will often do in these kind of positions is to play c4 at some point. Very, very complex positions. Again, there's also this plan to push the pawns forward here, often making use of the fact that white can win time by attacking the bishop on f5. Okay, so now you have an idea of the advanced variation, and let's have a look at d takes e4. Once again, completely different type of positions. White takes back on e4, of course, and now black has 3 main choices: playing knight d7, knight f6, or bishop to f5. Knight d7 is really not too different from the bishop f5 position, so we'll not take a look, but we can take a quick look at knight f6 when white takes on f6 usually, and black has a choice between taking back with the e and the g pawn. G takes f6 keeps his position, his pawn structure a little bit more loose. On the other hand, he has the half-open g file available, can put his bishop on g7. So this is an interesting option, but I think the better pawn structure here just gives white a slight edge, and e takes f6 keeps the pawn structure more cohesive, but once again, white now has the majority here of 4 pawns against 3, whereas black, his pawn structure is a little bit devalued due to the double f pawn on f6 and f7. And white has different plans here. You can go for queenside castle, you can go for kingside castle, but in general I think that the positions are maybe close to equal if black plays precisely, but this structural edge just favors white a little bit. So the main move in this position is the move bishop f5, attacking the knight. The knight goes back to g3, attacks the bishop, bishop goes to g6. And now what you often see is something like this, knight to f3. And now knight to d7, h4, trying to win the bishop by playing h5. Actually, I might have messed it up. It could be also going h4 immediately. I think it's h4 immediately. Not sure if it makes much of a difference, but let's put it like this. And now knight d7, stopping the knight from coming to e5. White goes h5, wins some more space there. Then it trades bishops, and we get something along these lines. And I'm making a lot of moves here, but what I want to get to is that black pretty much has to make a choice if he wants to castle queenside or if he wants to castle kingside. If he castles kingside with the pawn already advanced to h5, sometimes white can get some kind of attack going by moving this knight on g3 and playing g4, g5. So this is what black has to be aware of. And if he castles queenside, then his king position is pretty safe. On the other hand, when he plays c5, maybe then he might have some issues with his king. And that is the typical break here for black, to attack the white pawns, and at some point, pretty much always, will black play c5. This is his way to attack. e5 is often just not possible. And black wants to alleviate the lack of space here he has in this position, so he will go c5 at some point, and white needs to be able to react to this. Alright, now I think this was a good overview of the different kind of positions you'll get in the Caro-Kann. What's interesting about this opening, what we also saw here, is that you have a lot of different structures. Here you have quite an open structure, then in an advanced variation it's quite closed and complicated, also depending on how black plays. And then once again you can have a different structure in the two knight variations. In the Panov Attack you have an isolated pawn suddenly, and in the other exchange variation we saw you have this famous Karlsbad structure. So I think the Caro-Kann is a great opening to learn a lot about different pawn openings, pawn structures, and it is also known as a very solid option for black, which is difficult to break. My own opinion is white has a lot of different tries available, and they all have to be taken seriously. So you need to know your theory if you're playing the Caro-Kann. But if you do, then it's definitely a good opening to choose. I hope this was all clear to you guys. Let me know if you have any questions, and if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to my channel for future content. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.